This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area. Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villery.
Quiet on the set. Soon we will all be more informed.
We appreciate learning more of our region's news and public affairs. Cameras rolling.
Hello, everyone. I'm Robbie Chavez of the PBS NewsHour. Marcia Cavanaugh is off tonight. Huey Long's pledge of every man a king will be more apparent next week as a new governor is inaugurated and the carnival season begins. It will be a time of limousines and floats rolling over bumpy streets. We'll take a look at what's ahead, as well as the decline in violent crime, an early evaluation of New Orleans' new police chief, and possible redistricting for the state Supreme Court, and the latest on those street repairs. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Greg LaRose, editor of the Louisiana Illuminator, Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter, and Mike Perlstein, investigative reporter with WWL-TV Channel 4. Greg, let's start with you today. Governor Edwards, a full circle moment going back to his hometown for the final of several farewells.
Yeah, this was, we've come to expect, another recitation of the greatest hits, starting with inheriting a $2 billion budget deficit, leaving with a surplus in state government coffers exceeding $3 billion. I think he leaves a legacy of being our crisis governor, from hurricanes to the flood in 2016, which was just, days after he took office, to the pandemic, ice storms, you name it. It pretty much was something that he was asked to handle as chief executive. But also, I think you'll look back to and notice where he stood legislatively. It was during his term that Roe v. Wade was thrown out and a trigger law kicked in, Louisiana's really strict abortion law. He strove to find some middle ground with Republicans fiscally, and that in large parts responsible for putting the state in solid financial footing, which was, I think, a point he kept going back to over and over in his speech.
Yeah, and those successes, more money in the state coffers, more people on Medicaid, more people on the internet. So he certainly has a lot that he can celebrate.
Yeah, he called Medicaid the easiest big decision that he made, and he did it on that first day. About 500,000 people gain access to health care coverage. And he also noted that in neighboring states that have turned down that additional money that came from the Affordable Care Act, they're closing rural hospitals. And it's kind of, you wonder how Louisiana could recover if that were the case, because these other states that have not made that move are finding out right now it's really difficult to reach the public in a health standpoint.
It's acknowledged. Also, there was no talk of scandal. Usually when you get to the end of a term, you say, well, he did this, but on the other hand, this happened, But
his closest brush probably would have been the Ronald Greene death at the hands of white state troopers, where he was the target of a legislative started investigative panel, but they never really implicated him in what was thought to be a cover-up. The consequences are still unfolding for the troopers involved.
And there's probably a couple of things that he wished he would have done, raising the minimum wage, getting rid of the death penalty. That probably will not go further.
No, and he repeatedly tried regarding the minimum wage. It wasn't until his last year that he came out officially opposed to the death penalty, and his efforts to gain clemency for the 50-plus people on death row have fallen flat. I don't see them going anywhere anytime soon.
Now, don't you have to look at what elements of his legacy might get undone, and what would some of the first steps be by the new Governor Landry?
I think he's going to jump right into the crime special session, perhaps peeling back the raise the age criminal justice measures that treated 17-year-olds in most cases as juveniles. There's a pretty sizable contingent of the legislature and our new governor who wants to, get tougher on crime.
And criminal justice reform would be right up there, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I would think so. It's first on the list.
Release from, early release from lengthy prison sentences.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about incoming Governor Jeff Landry. The inauguration is set for Monday. What are we expecting besides rain? A little pomp and circumstance. I understand 9,000 flags out there.
Yeah, they are said rain and shine on the Capitol steps. Supposed to be windy and wet, so we'll see how that goes. He starts his morning in St. Martinville at a Catholic church, private ceremony before moving over to Baton Rouge, when the legislature will also be meeting for its organizational session. So our lawmakers are sworn into office as well. And the day ends with the People's Ball at the River Center in Baton Rouge, where for a $100 ticket you can take part.
Right. We didn't see him in a lot of debates, but we certainly got an idea of how he's going to govern. What do you expect him to say?
I think he'll speak in broad terms about governing from the right. We've not really seen a whole lot of specifics. I can think off the top of my head, one thing he's mentioned is the possibility of adding a work requirement and co-payments to Medicaid. He said he won't rescind the governor's expansion to Medicaid, but he, I think, turned up some ears when he mentioned about the work requirement. Otherwise, he's been pretty nebulous insofar as, what his crime package might be, his legislative priorities. Again, I think it'll be more right-leaning. His challenge, in my opinion, is providing some steering, some guidance to what I think is, yes, a conservative legislature, but there are various factions within those conservative lawmakers that each one's going to want to wave their own flag, and I think his job is to get his floor leaders to congeal that conservative aim.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to watch how that all shapes up. Talking about the inauguration, you can watch it right here on WYES. That inauguration of incoming Governor Jeff Landry starts at 11 o'clock. You can watch here on WYES. You can watch those ceremonies live from Baton Rouge. You can also watch it on our YouTube channel. Let's switch on over now to talk a little bit about violent crime, and Mike will talk to you about that. Let's just kind of go back a little bit of kind of like where we ended last year and kind of what did we see?
Well, obviously, when you talk about violent crime, you're almost always focused on New Orleans, which sadly is, kind of the focal point when it comes to violent crime. And by all measures, 2023 was a promising year with reductions, not just in murder, which is the statistic that everyone immediately turns to, but those are smaller numbers than robbery, non-fatal shootings, and all of those violent crime categories went down by double digits. I think the overall violent crime reduction was 22%. The reduction in homicide was 28%. So this was not an anomaly or one category or another, but an across-the-board reduction. And it was even more promising looking forward in the sense that the end of last year, the end of 2022 was bad, and the beginning of 2023 was also very bad. Really, this continual decrease in crime was throughout the last 10 months of the year, and December, when it came to shootings and killings in particular, was the low mark of the year. So once again, there's a lot of optimism that carries over into 2024.
But what happened from that period until October? I mean, what changed?
I guess that's always the big question: is what was the factors?
Criminologists, study this sometimes for decades and don't have pat answers because so many factors go into crime trends. But number one, crime has gone down nationally. Almost all major cities saw similar decreases. New Orleans was actually saw decreases, a little beyond the national averages. We tend to be worse sometimes than national average when we go up, better than the national average when we go down. That was the case in 2023. And certainly getting out of COVID, and not just the lockdown part, but the period immediately after the COVID lockdowns was terrible for New Orleans.
In most cities.
In most cities. No, that was absolutely a national trend in 2020.
So people are going back to school, back to work.
Right, getting back into just normal routine. more settled, and this is always a factor in jobs, the economy improving, more stability, certainly kids in schools, because there are some, I guess, dark linings in this silver cloud of the overall crime rate, which would be it was not a good year for juvenile crime. There were more juvenile, say, homicide victims than the previous year. And the fact that kids are, back in school in wholesale numbers tend to, improve the overall picture.
And so have things
generally
shifted? Have things shifted? People feeling safer? Is the morale better with the police department?
Okay, so people's personal feelings of security is always lagging the actual numbers. People just latch on, even let's say, obviously, you see murder, and that is a kind of the number that stands out to a lot of people, where it affects a very small number of people in the overall community, yet people are fearful. And any amount of killings that hit the headlines that people absorb when they follow the news is too many, and it causes obviously some anxiety. Other things that are more universal were not so good, and this is where we talk about some of the negative underlying currents. Carjackings way down 44%. Car thefts way up 77% increase. A lot having to do with the TikTok video that shows how easy it is to steal a Kia and a Hyundai, right? Yep. And so there's always, so many factors. You really have to tease them out. But the overall trend is good, and I know that there is optimism, once again, that now with that lag time and that people's individual reactions feeling safer, that hopefully comes next, and people, can go back to, I guess, a feeling of more normalcy and not having crime as the predominant concern
all the time, right? Yeah. Okay, thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. Dawn, let's switch over to you and talk about the patchy progress we've been seeing, if you can call it that, with all the road work going on. It seems like my drive all the time hits every pothole in every construction site in the city.
Or every detour or street. I saw actually on social media this week somebody bringing a birthday cake to their construction site in their neighborhood because it was a year old and still shut down. And if it gives you any inclination of how New Orleanians are feeling about the projects going on around them, there's a Instagram page that we've talked about on this show. It's Look at This, pardon my French, effing street. It has 116,000 followers. Roadwork NOLA, which is the government website, which will update you in real time about the projects in your neighborhood, has less than 5,000 followers. So do people want to complain or be updated? I'll let you decide. But this is all part of this huge project, $2.3 billion federal project. That's why so much of the projects got started at the same time, to hold on to the dollars before we lost the dollars. It's called the FEMA Joint Infrastructure Recovery Request Program. And currently there are 49 projects as of today, according to the DPW, Department of Public Works, 49 road projects under construction with an estimated value of almost $700 million. So there is progress coming. They have also repaired hundreds of street lights, 600 on the interstate alone, 5,429 total streetlight outages. So if you're driving the interstate and saying, why is it so dark? It is still so dark, especially I find at Carrollton and the interstate, right by the Costco interchange. That's super dark.
I think Councilman Joe Giarrusso has said that the state is going to essentially get those lights back on fairly soon.
Yes. They've also, to date, in the last year, filled 20,000 plus potholes, cleaned out storm ditches and drainage ditches, but it all takes time and coordination, and they are hoping people will be calm and considerate and deal with the construction. There's a big project that's getting ready to start on AP Tour Road from St. Bernard to Broad, where they're putting in a bike path. There's been lots of do they work, don't they work? This is right around St. Aug, and the goal is to improve pedestrian safety and slow the traffic down there, and also improve access for people to park and people to bike. So it's all sorts of different kinds of repairs within this $2.3 billion. A
lot of those changes will be good to see once they're complete, but you have to get through it a lot of work still left to be done.
If you do want real-time updates about what's going on, roadwork.nola.gov is the website for you. You can also text Roadwork NOLA to 77295, 77295 Roadwork NOLA, and you will get real-time updates.
And there's a
on your
timeline
phone.
also, sorry, Errol, there's a timeline also, right? They want to kind of get a lot of this work done before the Super Bowl.
Yes. The Super Bowl, having the Super Bowl is always very helpful in terms of getting things done and making it look pretty for our visitors. So that's next year around this time. It should be looking spiffy.
Thank you, Dawn. Let's go over to Errol now. Errol, Carnival upon us already tomorrow in a shortened season this year.
It is. It's February 13th is Mardi Gras. There's some different thoughts about having an early Mardi Gras. I mean, most people prefer and think it's better to have a late Mardi Gras just because the further away you are from Christmas, the more time you have to build up your funds and to get in the mood to travel. And so usually an earlier carnival isn't as good as a later one. We have had, a few years ago, we had one February 5th, and then we had one February 8th. And so it's not as bad as it could be. So this is in the middle. There's for historic geeks, there's kind of something symbolic to February 13th, that the first Rex Parade was on February 13th, 1872. And so this is that same date. Also, during the past year, one of the giant figures of Mardi Gras was lost, and that was Ed Muniz with Endymion. And this year's parade date happens to be his birthday. Oh, wow. And Arthur Hardy's God points out that they're going to have a special float, a founder's float, commemorating him because he was important. We lost two giant figures over the last couple of years, too. P.T. Barnum types with Ed Muniz and of course, Blaine Kern is going on. But as far as the attendance, though, no one knows exactly what the attendance. What's different about carnival attendance is it used to be the people that were there, the people who came to town and see the parades. But now, with the big parades, and this is, I guess, the positive thing, with Orpheus, Endymion, with 3,200 riders, Bacchus, this economy can't afford all those people, and so they recruit out of town too. So a lot of out of town people, they come in, and these are people with money. These people have been coming for years. They're part of a group in Texas or something. Then they come in every year, and they have their spots in the hotels, and so the parades themselves are generating more people that come in for the weekend, and especially that last weekend. And so I think that's a healthy thing.
And Errol, what's happening with police protection and security? Seems like the city has not kind of developed a plan yet to kind of just engage. They're still searching on how they're going to get that done.
They have, but I think that's Carnival's biggest worry into the future. They have a plan that they're going to maximize the New Orleans police, the criminal sheriffs. They're also working on something to round up as many people in the regional area, like bringing like 150 extra people in the regional area.
And I can tell you that blueprint from last year, where a lot of outside agencies contributed, helped by the sheriff's office bringing them in, that's going to continue this year.
Yeah, it was a good thing. There's a little bit of controversy on how they're paid, but it's something that's got to be a solution because that's the one thing that can, in the long run, hold things back. Jeff Landry, and his New Orleans task force, talked a lot about New Orleans and the crime problems and utilizing the state police, and so he sounds like somebody that we're going to get good cooperation from that. But that's really the biggest issue.
And in terms of the parade routes and what's happening, Endymion gets to go down one of its traditional routes, correct?
Yeah. Everything's pretty much the same. There were things that were interrupted by construction, and so everything is better. So all signs are it's going to be an okay carnival. My guess is that the attendance will be probably in the hotel attendance, probably in the 90th percentile. You could never measure how many people are staying with friends and guest houses and that sort of thing. But I think it'll be okay if it's another problem with February 13th. Sometimes it's kind of cold that time of the year.
Yeah, the costumes, not as many come out.
Yeah, and so if we can get past that, I think we'll be okay.
Okay, all right.
And by the way, next year it's March 4th, and so it's going to be a late Mardi Gras.
We like that, yeah, all right. Mike, let's switch back over to you. We want to talk a little bit about the police chief. She was sworn in November. You talked to her in October. Tell us a little bit about kind of your sense of how she's doing.
Well, I can tell you that as far as the grade that you might give her, still a work in progress simply because she hasn't been here long enough. But all early reports are very positive as far as integrating herself in not just leading the police department, but working with other federal law enforcement agencies, dealing with the consent decree, has met with the federal judge overseeing the consent decree, made actually a little bit of progress there when things seemed to be at a standstill. So the early reports are good. I can just tell you that, her personality and vast experience, she had been a chief in several other cities. She even said it herself, is sort of a career capper. And so she doesn't need to prove anything. This is not a stepping stone to some, other job elsewhere. And that has given her, a really good, clean start. She's not part of cliques. She's not local. She's not beholden to politics. And so everything that, she's very straightforward, very direct, and also, she's a lawyer in addition to a career, law enforcement officer. She knows, the issues at hand. This was something that I think a lot of people in the business community who have dealt with her complimented her business acumen, her management style. Like she grasps, she's the head of a $100 million plus, a year agency, and seems to understand that. Now, what we have not seen, and that's what we'll be looking for perhaps the first quarter of this year, is when she makes her personal imprint on the leadership team. She inherited...
Right. She talked a little bit about organizational restructuring.
That's right. And, right now, I guess we're a little top-heavy at the NOPD on deputy chiefs. She inherited all of those. And, one, for example, that stands out, Michelle Woodfork, who, had been the interim before the national search, infamously at one point, when she made the finalist, said she thought she was a shoo-in and did not get that job. But she got elevated to deputy chief over retention and recruitment. But everyone thinks that some of those deputy chiefs are going to get shuffled, perhaps some of the district commanders, as Ann Kirkpatrick gets to know them, their skills and abilities. I will say that, one other thing to look for is her crime-fighting plan. She, for the most part, has given tremendous credit to what she inherited, which was, a pretty robust plan. It wasn't, something that novel, but more of a focus on the most violent offenders. And sometimes you have to let some of the smaller things, some quality of life things, and some, say, minor possession drug offenses like marijuana, you leave that to the side so officers, which are very limited. Now she's dealing with a huge deficit with just over 900 officers. You got to be strategic, and she has continued the deployment to really bear down. What you don't see behind the scenes is the identification of what they would call the worst of the worst shooters, violent offenders, violent repeat offenders, and they don't necessarily have to pop up as a suspect in a murder before this police department gears up to, get them behind bars on whatever they may be doing involved in drugs and other things. I think that's going to be a big focus when she does finally unveil, what might be the Kirkpatrick crime plan. You're going to see a lot of that. And some people are making comparisons to Richard Pennington, who, as you recall, in the mid-90s under Mark Morial, he came as an outsider from Washington, D.C., and he was similarly, postured in that he didn't know anybody, kept his own counsel, could make really independent decisions, and that's exactly what she's doing so far.
Okay, let's switch on over. Thank you for that. Let's switch on over to Greg now. Talking a little bit about the Louisiana Supreme Court, we've talked a lot about congressional redistricting, but a lot of talk now about redistricting the Supreme Court here in Louisiana.
Right, and the congressional districts have gotten all of the attention because it led to a court case that all signs now point to Louisiana getting a second majority black district. Now, everybody on the Supreme Court is on board with that goal. It's time to have the districts represent the racial makeup of Louisiana. Where they part ways is how they draw those districts. 5 of the justices, the associate justices, reached out to the governor-elect, attorney general-elect, and legislative leaders to say that, okay, here's our map. And that map all but decimates a Northwest Louisiana district and the Bayou region district. Those 2 justices, which include Chief Justice John Weimer are opposed, and they followed up with their own letters to the state leaders to let them know.
And the Chief Justice feeling a little left out. There's some friction there?
Yeah, there's a history there in regards to him facing what I would call political challenges to his seat. If you rewind back to 2019, you might remember that the NAACP was challenging the makeup of those districts with the hopes that it would lead to a redistricting the following year, or by court order. The legislature, unlike every other political body, does not, or every other redistricting, the lawmakers aren't required by law to redistrict the Supreme Court every 10 years. So that lawsuit from the NAACP was aimed at, hey, it's time. They've only done it twice in the past 100 years. And obviously we've changed as a demographic in the state. Landry came to bat for the NAACP and wanted to hold off on all Supreme Court elections, which at that time only affected Chief Justice John Weimer. Weimer and some sheriffs who aligned with him interceded, lifted the stay on that, but there you kind of see the history of political conflict between the governor-elect and the Chief Justice. I would expect that you could see another plan surface in time for the special session on redistricting. I'm already seeing some Northwest Louisiana lawmakers saying they're opposed to the plan that the 5 other justices have come up with because it splits Bossier and Caddo parishes, which traditionally have always been a congruent part of the Supreme Court district.
Right, and so that will be handled with the congressional redistricting during the special session.
Landry has said as much, that, yeah, lawmakers will have a pretty tight window. It takes a minimum of 5 days. They have about 7.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much, Greg. All right, let's go around the table and see what other stories we're looking at. Errol?
Okay. There are 3 crews that are having significant anniversaries this year: Carrollton, Mid-City, and Okeanos. The 2 oldest are Carrollton and Mid-City. What I think is interesting about Mid-City, this will be 90 years. Carrollton's going to be 100, but 90 years will be in the 1930s. And that was a time of big growth in parades because the municipal auditorium had been constructed in 1930. So all of a sudden, these people had this building where you could go and you could have carnival balls and that sort of thing. And so that spurred on a lot of activity, and I think Mid-City would be an example of that.
Great. Greg, what are you looking at?
We're still waiting to see who's going to fill the cabinet post of Governor-elect Landry in Department of Corrections and Public Safety that oversees all of the prisons and juvenile facilities around the state. Plus, it technically oversees state police, although the current office holder has said basically, I just approve their vacation time. It's a big position to fill.
All right, Dawn.
Back to streets a little. One other change to look for this year is a new thing called pedestrian hybrid beacons, which are basically pedestrian crosswalks at existing intersections. It's not new infrastructure. It's added on to existing traffic lights, and drivers might have to be educated on stopping for pedestrians.
Well, and I'm sure we'll have you back about that.
Yes.
All right. Mike?
And just on a completely different note, this is that time of year where we, pivot on the pro sports scene. From football to basketball. Now the Saints still mathematically are alive, depending on what happens on Sunday, but no one has them making a long run. However, the Pelicans have turned a corner, so to speak, not just with the winning record, but the last 3 wins have been convincing wins over good teams. So I do think that as the Saints wind down, whenever they finally wrap up their season, people will start to turn their attention to what is the most promising Pelicans team in several years.
All right. Thank you all. Thank you all for joining us. That is Informed Sources for tonight. Thank you very much for watching. Marcia will be back next weekend. Take care.
Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villery.
Public television is our passion. With so much content that WYES broadcasts and presents online, we are quite entertained and highly informed.
Please join us in supporting WYES.
This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.